Welcome to the second episode of the From a Certain Point of View podcast. I'm Josh,
I'm Adam.
and welcome back, everybody. We're so glad that you could join us today, and we're so glad to be talking Star Wars reviews, news, and our points of view once again. And so, Adam, what have you been up to this week with Star Wars? What have you been watching, reading, playing?
Well, a couple things. I've been reading some comics, getting caught up on there. I'm kind of playing catch up on a lot of stuff, so I've been reading some of the main line of the Star Wars comics,
Hmm.
and I'm at Yoda's Secret War right now, which is I think issues like 26 or 27, the low 30s of that series. So reading
Okay,
that,
gotcha.
been trying to wrap up Ahsoka, the novel, which I'm enjoying a bit. And I've also finished yet another rewatch of the entire saga. Uh,
Hmm.
we'll get into that later, but yeah, there is a point for that. So yeah, a couple of comics, a novel, and a lot of movies.
Awesome. I
How about
think
you?
it's always good to get our Star Wars fix in. I feel like I
Yeah,
always need some kind of Star Wars fix through the week.
yeah.
Um, and for me, I've also been rewatching the entire saga. I just finished Solo the
Okay,
other day. So Rogue One would be up next for me. And that's actually
cool.
my wife Brittany's favorite Star Wars movie. So I'm sure
Yeah,
she'll be
it's up
watching that
there.
one with
It's
me.
up
She
there.
loves
Yeah,
that one.
I
Um,
just I've been listening to a Spotify playlist of official um, the official Star Wars account. They have the whole,
mhm.
and every time that intro anthem for, I love that anthem.
Yeah, I gotta say, I think Rogue One has a very underrated musical score.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, the more I listen to it, I love it.
Yeah,
It's very Star Wars, but it's also very unique and different from most
right.
of what we've heard. So I really, especially like the Jyn Erso and Hope suite,
Yep, that's
that
yep,
track in
that's the
particular,
one.
I just love it.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of some of the main intro fanfares and all that to the
Hmm.
regular episodes. And I don't know, it's just it's different, but it still feels the same, which is
Absolutely.
tough to pull off. But man, it I love that soundtrack. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I love it as well, and so I'm looking forward to watching Rogue One again. That's where I'm at right now. I've also started reading the new novel that came out called Resistance Reborn. Came out just a few days ago, and it is set in between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker.
yep,
And it's all about, after what happened in The Last Jedi, the Resistance kind of rebuilding itself and kind of leading into the events of The Rise of Skywalker. I've only read the first few chapters, but there were a couple interesting things I
okay,
kind of pulled from that. Um, One thing was that the First Order actually used Corellia to build their ships and everything,
okay,
which I thought was kind of a neat tie-in um, to the Empire and what we see in the beginning of Solo actually on Corellia.
yeah,
And another thing that was interesting that I pulled out of the first few chapters I read was Ray having a conversation with Leia, um, just about Ben Solo and
okay,
whether he can be redeemed or not.
yeah,
And
okay,
Leia kind of says something to the effect of, "That's up to him now. It's not something that we can help with." And Ray said something specifically that I thought was interesting, and she was like, "He wanted me to become like him," um, which made me kind of think of the dark Ray um, image that we got in the
oh right, the
D23
D20,
footage,
yeah, yeah,
and I'm like, okay, is this like what she could have been if she would have followed Kylo Ren and become like him? Is that what we're seeing? Is it kind of like a vision, as opposed to it being some dark clone of Ray or something like that. But yeah, just I
yeah,
don't know. I'm just
okay.
making speculation,
Yeah, it's
but
interesting. I picked it up on Audible, but I haven't had time to start it yet. So
mhm.
I think it's going to be next week's listen.
Yeah, it's pretty good so far.
Next week's going to be a heavy week, I think. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, but yeah, I'd say it's I'm enjoying it so far. I think it pulls in a lot of different new canon, and kind of ties it all together and everything, and just kind of brings back some of the characters from the new canon that we've been reading about, and brings it all together. Some of the
Okay.
characters from the Aftermath trilogy, and
Okay.
some of the other
Okay.
characters from current canon.
Right. Cool.
So I would definitely give it a read.
Cool.
Um, the other thing I wanted to kind of touch on in our intro here is the article you wrote, which I enjoyed very much. Um,
Did I set something off with that?
a little bit.
Okay, cool. Let's do it.
um, so the name of your article was "Rise of Skywalker's Short To-Do List," and
Yeah.
just kind of what you feel the Rise of Skywalker needs to do.
Right.
And I found it pretty interesting. And I mean, I really liked what you said, that this movie doesn't have to necessarily fix Star
Yeah.
Wars, or
And
fix what
right.
the Last Jedi ruined, according to some people.
Yeah. And
Um,
I think that was my main point with this whole thing. I think that a lot of pressure, I guess, is being put on the Rise of Skywalker
Ton of pressure.
to right the ship or something like that. I
Hmm.
think the point that I'm really trying to make is that the ship doesn't need righted. There's just a few minor
Hmm.
things that it needs to touch on to really wrap up this saga in a nice way. So I think overall that's my main. There's that it doesn't have to fix everything. It just has to do
Right.
a couple things right, and that's it.
Yeah, because I think if we put that much pressure on it, it can't possibly necessarily deliver.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Right.
If we set those expectations way too high, it can't possibly meet them. So, um, but you noted kind of a few things that it does need to do, and
Yeah.
giving a fitting end for Leia, which I completely agree with, and we'll get into that a little bit with our first news article in a couple minutes.
Yeah. Right.
Um, and also looking at ending the past but not killing all of it, and I really couldn't agree more. And I don't think it's going to kill all of it. And I think when Kylo Ren says, "Let the past die, kill it if you have to," a lot of people took that as, okay, this is what Disney is saying, this is what Ryan Johnson is saying, that has to happen. But I don't think that's true. I think it's just Kylo Ren's perspective of that character. But in reality, I think this story is all about, the whole story of the sequel trilogy is about kind of taking in what the past is, the legends of the past, and like, how can we embrace all of that, but then also
Yeah.
move forward in a new direction,
Right.
for the galaxy. So
Right.
I don't think characters like Lando or Chewie or the Falcon itself or 3PO or R2D2, I don't think any of those characters are going to like die or be destroyed or
Yeah,
anything.
and see
Um,
that's one of my fears, and I've heard people talk like this, like in order to wrap things up, it's almost like things have to die, and I don't like that perspective. I don't see any reason why. Like to be honest, I don't see any reason why like all three of the main core characters, and I think I mentioned that in that article. I don't
mhm.
see any reason why they all three had to die in order to forward
Right.
in a new
Yeah, I
timeline.
can I can see that.
However, I mean, I don't begrudge the fact that it's happening.
Hmm.
I just don't know that it had to happen, and I just don't want to see those story choices made just for that reason. That's all.
Just for the sake of, yeah, having to kind of
Right.
destroy
Right.
the past.
Right.
And yeah, I think when it came to the Force Awakens, I think we all saw it coming that Han was probably going to go, and um,
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
was kind of almost a given. As far as Luke, I didn't expect him necessarily to die in 8. I thought maybe that would happen in 9, and he would just become a Force ghost, just to kind of bring everything full circle. But
Right.
I'm kind of hoping that Leia doesn't, but I could see that she might.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
possible. So.
Right. And that's something I know I mentioned that because I remember writing that, but like
Hmm.
it seems like it's gonna happen, and that's why one of
Right.
my main things was to give her a good send off. Um,
Yeah.
but I could see there being ways that she doesn't die. But
Hmm.
I do think that it could happen. It's probably going to happen. Put it that way.
Right. Right. Yeah, I could see it going either way.
Yeah.
Um, and then your last point about just kind of establishing the future
Mhm.
and possibly a new Jedi Order, and I would love to see, like, at the end of the Rise of Skywalker. And I don't know if we're gonna get this or not, but I would just love to see, you know, Ray, like, some flash forward maybe in time, Ray kind of training a new generation of Jedi, and maybe the Force Ghost looking on,
Mhm.
um, at all of that, and
Or
even
even
if they don't,
right. Or even her,
even if they don't
like
do
one
that, yeah,
shot of her walking into a Jedi temple on Yavin or something like that.
right,
You know?
right, just so we know the story can continue, some
Right.
years down the road,
Yeah.
um, because with the intention of the sequel trilogy being a passing of the torch, I would hate to see all these new characters that I've come to love, um, not be utilized again. So,
Yeah.
um,
Right.
I want to see them again down the road.
Yeah. For sure.
The only thing I would kind of add to, I think, what I need from the Rise of Skywalker is I do want it to feel like kind of this satisfying conclusion, that makes it feel like a whole complete story, episodes 1 to 9. And I think JJ is all about tying everything together, and I think there maybe isn't a better way to do that than bringing Palpatine in. And I think he ties prequel, original trilogy, and sequel trilogy, can tie it all together if they do it right.
Yeah.
Um, so I think
Yeah.
that's one thing
Agree.
I kind of want out of it.
Yep. Agree.
All right. Well, very well
Cool.
done on the article. And if you're
Thank
listening,
you.
I recommend heading to our page and reading that article.
Yeah, and while you're
Um,
there, Josh had a blog post this week about what it means to for the force to be in balance. So while you're there, you probably ought to check that one out too.
well, I appreciate that as well. And we'll see
Yeah.
if balance comes into play in episode 9.
Yep.
Um, so are we ready to go into our news segment this week?
Yeah. Let's cue the news.
Well, you want the bad news or the really bad news?
Okay, our first story, once again comes from StarWarsNewsNet.com, and it is Anthony Daniels talking about his new book, I Am C3PO. And he kind of just talks about, you know his many years in Star Wars, from the original trilogy to the prequels to the sequels, and I just think what an amazing legacy, for this actor and this character, to have spanned that much time,
Yeah.
um,
Entire
being in almost
saga.
every
Right.
single Star Wars movie, except for Solo. Um,
Right.
yeah, any thoughts you have on that, Adam?
Yeah. I mean, it's is really the only actor that has been, like you said, in every major episode in the saga. It's an amazing accomplishment, and like it's almost like he is kind of Star Wars for us, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
been there the whole time. One of the very few that has been there that long. Um, I Some of his comments about giving 3PO a more major role, I think maybe was a little, I guess, a little much. I guess it's
Well, let's face it. Anthony Daniels can be a bit of a ham, right? I mean,
yeah, a bit of a
he's
ham, a little
he
bit of an
loves the spotlight. He
yeah,
loves the attention.
a
So
little
his
bit of an
character's kind
ego,
of in the
right?
background.
Right.
Yeah, a little bit. As much as we
S-
love him.
Yeah, so some of that I was like, you're a supporting character. Just let's put that in perspective, right?
Right,
So,
right.
but yeah, I would love to get a chance to read his book, and I haven't yet. I almost picked it up this week, but I passed for Resistance Reborn. But
Hmm.
at some point, I would love to circle around and check out what he has to say there.
Right. So when he also speaks, about episode 9 in particular, and I pulled a
Mhm.
quote from that, and it says, "It all felt so right and so fulfilling. Chris and JJ had gathered in all the threads and tatters of the previous episodes and spun a mystery of their own, a wondrous coup of creative storytelling, a fulfilling and rewarding closure for everyone." Um, so I don't think I could be any more excited about that quote in particular.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, for a couple reasons. One is pulling in all these threads of the previous episodes, and as I said a little bit earlier, tying it all together is something that I think is very important to make it feel like one whole connected story.
Yeah.
And then it's something that's fulfilling and rewarding for everybody, and just kind of a satisfying conclusion, because I think we're all looking for that. Um, and we don't want to put all the pressure on episode 9 to reunite the fan base, but I think that it can go a
Right.
long way
Sure.
to doing that.
Definitely.
So, any more thoughts you had on that particular article?
No, I don't think. I think that about covers.
Okay, excellent. So next up in the news is Todd Fisher, who is Carrie Fisher's brother, and spoke to Yahoo Entertainment um, just about Carrie and her, of course, her passing,
Right.
her untimely death, and her involvement with Episode 9, kind of beyond the grave,
Yeah.
and just how initially her role was supposed to be much bigger for Episode 9. Kind of, I guess, how like The Force Awakens was kind of Han Solo's movie in a way, and then The Last Jedi
Yeah.
was Luke, and
Right.
then Episode 9 was going to be Carrie.
Right.
Um, and obviously, unfortunately, her role had to be, cut down quite a bit, which is, I think, part of the reason why Colin Trevorrow was replaced by J.J. Abrams.
Yeah. Could
Um,
be. Could be.
so I'm sure he had kind of a vision of how he wanted it to go, and then it just couldn't possibly go that way. And maybe that played into it. But
Yeah.
the quote I pulled from this news article was again from Todd Fisher, saying the truth is that JJ was great friends with Carrie. He had an extraordinary sense of love for her. They had 8 minutes of footage. They grabbed every frame and analyzed it, and then reverse engineered it and got it into the story the right way. It's kind of magical. So, what are your thoughts on that quote, Adam?
I'm v- I'm I'm very excited to see how that works.
Mm-hmm.
It's something like when I first heard that that was going to happen, I was just, and I'm still maybe a little bit nervous about that because reusing old footage to tie this whole thing together sounds a little risky to me.
Yeah, it does.
But I I trust in that decision, I guess, and I'm really excited to see how that works. It sounds like Todd has some inside views into how this is all working out, and I imagine he would be. Um, you would think that there would have to be some type of permission granted
Sure.
for that. So it seems like he has some type of knowledge about this,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes me excited to see how that all works together.
Yeah, I think it's a really good sign that he seems very pleased. Um,
Right.
and if he seems very pleased with it, I think that's good news for Star Wars fans too. Um, and because initially I thought, well, with Carrie Fisher passing away, we'll probably just get something in the opening crawl saying that Leia passed away from her injuries from being exposed to the vacuum of space, or something like that, and the story would pick up a couple years later.
Right.
But as it turns out, we're getting Leia in this movie, and we're getting at least 8 minutes of Leia. It sounds like so.
Yeah.
That's it's not a lot of screen time, but I think it's enough to give her a proper send off.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. And
So
some of that is maybe okay because, like we said before in the intro, this is, and we've known this for a while. This has been a passing of the torch.
mhm.
So maybe having, I don't want to say less of Leia, but maybe having enough of Leia, and then relying on our new characters to push us forward. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think if we're to believe the direction the Last Jedi took us, that Poe might be that next leader. Um,
Right.
and since I saw the Force Awakens, I kind of wanted to see Poe take that leadership role. So I could definitely see that happening, and that
Yeah.
passing
Yeah.
of the
Definitely.
torch. So yeah, so looking forward to seeing Leia's presence in Episode 9. And I mean, Todd talks a little bit too, just kind of Carrie kind of speaking to us beyond the grave, and how in Star Wars, you can exist within the Force forever, and
Right.
maybe
Right.
maybe we'll get to see Leia, become one with the Force or as a Force ghost as well, which would be awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So, do
So
you want to tell us about our final
yeah,
article for the news this week?
the last kind of major thing that came out this week it was an earnings call. Bob Iger, CEO of Disney, was speaking on Star Wars, and part of this, we already knew. He mentioned that the
Hmm.
films after the Rise of Skywalker are going to go on hiatus, and we knew that. I guess the one question mark is how long that's going to be now. Do we still get the original plan was, and we talked about this last week, the movie in 2022, which was
Hmm.
supposed to be the first of the Benioff and Weiss trilogy.
Right.
So, do we still get a movie in 2022? I don't know. He didn't actually say how long that hiatus would be. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, I think his quote was a few
a
years.
few
So,
years, which still
you
puts
could
it
take that
around
as
that. Yeah, it would still puts it around that. A few could be 2022, right? But-
it could be. Yeah.
So yeah, so we don't exactly, I guess, know at this point what the plan is as far as how long that hiatus will be. But I guess that's more just a confirmation of what we already that we're not going to get new Star Wars movies per se for the next
Right.
few years, which is fine.
Yeah. That is fun. I mean, I have two kind of feelings about it.
Uh-huh.
On one end, I'm a little bit disappointed because I love Star Wars coming out at Christmas and that being kind of an event thing that
Sure.
everybody gets together around Christmas time and you go see the Star Wars movie. We've been a little spoiled with that um, in the past several years, but uh, at the same time, I think sometimes with Star Wars, it's a good thing to take a little break and then and it becomes even more special when you do get a movie. So.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Mhm.
And then the other part of that news, which is actually really exciting, there's actually even more TV projects in the works uh, for Disney
Yeah,
Plus.
it did seem that way. Hmm.
Even more than it's already been announced that we know about. So uh,
Right.
I am pretty excited for the futures of Star Wars on a smaller screen because, like we know, the storytelling you can dive into in like 10 to 12 hours of screen time is pretty exciting for a season of TV style content. So
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like, going into the theater and experiencing Star Wars in
right,
that way, but
sure,
at the same time, like what TV can do, like you said, you can get so much more character development, so much more details and create a world in a way that you maybe can't in a 2.5 hour movie.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
I'm very excited about that.
yeah, definitely.
Can't wait for Disney Plus to launch on Tuesday.
Oh man, I can't wait. We're
Yeah,
recording on Saturday, so we're 3 days away.
that's
Coming.
right. Getting closer and closer.
Yep. Okay.
So, are we ready to move into our reviews segment of the show?
Yep. Let's do it.
My disappointment in your performance cannot be overstated.
So, this week in our reviews segment, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Star Wars animated series Resistance. Um,
Yeah.
and Adam, you have not watched this show, correct?
Yeah. Unfortunately, this is going to be all you because I haven't watched a single episode of the show.
Okay. So, I'm just going to give kind of my general brief reaction to this show as a whole, not specifically this past week's episode or anything.
Okay.
I think Resistance is definitely a show for kids.
That's what I've
While
heard. Yeah.
adults can get
Right.
a little bit of enjoyment out of it. I mean, it can be very silly at times. There's kind of like can be the sort of slapstick comedy type
Okay.
stuff at times.
Okay.
But it is beautiful to look at. At first, I wasn't sure about the animation style being more kind of anime in a way. Um, but I've grown to really love and appreciate the look of it. The colors are really beautiful. The way that they've put it together, it's really nice to look at, and it's very enjoyable when it ties into the larger story and when it connects to the things that are going on. Like when we see in the first season, we get to see Poe a little bit and BB-8 and even General Leia for a little bit. it's not as strong when it tries to do its own thing. I will say that, and this isn't like the Clone Wars or Rebels level for me, anyways. I do enjoy it, but it's not on par with those animated series, which
Okay.
Rebels in particular I really love. But the thing that I do love about this show is getting to watch it with my family. It's a show that Sydney can sit with Brittany and I, and we watch it together,
Okay.
and she kind of enjoys it. So I love that aspect of it.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, that's totally
so that's the
fair.
one thing, it's something you can sit down with your kids and they'll get some enjoyment out of it, which I think is cool. And lately they've been dealing with the First Order, and they're trying to find the resistance base on Dakar,
Okay.
which they have learned that it's been destroyed. So it's kind of, we're in the events of right after The Last Jedi.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and so when it ties into that stuff and ties into the First Order, there's some pretty good stuff in there. So I would give it kind of a slight recommendation. If you have a kid at home and something that they might enjoy, and you can get a little bit of enjoyment out of it as an adult as well.
Okay. Cool.
Um, so those are kind of just my overall thoughts on Resistance.
Yeah, like I said, it's not something I've watched, but with Disney Plus on the way, it's definitely something that's on my radar to circle around to at some point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think our reviews segment of the show is definitely going to ramp up a little bit starting next
Oh
week when
man,
we
next week is going to be heavy.
look at The Mandalorian, because we'll have 2 episodes
2 episodes,
watched.
yeah, not just that,
Of
and
the
we'll have two
yeah,
episodes of that. We have Jedi Fallen Order, which will be
Jedi Fallen Order. Yeah,
for
so we'll be a
about a
review
day
heavy
from then. So
section next week.
yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun next week.
So are we ready to go into our segment called Points of View for this week?
Yep, and we got a big topic here this week, so I'm ready.
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
Okay, our points of view section this week is going to be a big talk on everyone's favorite topic, The Last Jedi. I have purposely kept Josh in the dark all week on this. I told him we wanted to talk about. I told him I wanted to talk about Last Jedi this week, but I didn't tell him what I wanted to talk about, and I promise I won't do that every week. But I wanted this to kind of be like an organic conversation, because a couple things. First of all, The Last Jedi, the conversation around it has honestly been beaten to death over the last 2 years. Can you agree?
For sure. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm in suspense here, but I'm okay with you keeping me in the dark.
Cool.
So where are we taking this, Adam?
Yeah, so this wasn't actually when we started this podcast, when we talked about discussing points of view and things like that. This felt like a show that we had to do at some point, just because it's such a big topic. But it's also a show that I didn't want to do unless there was something new to be said. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not
So
gonna lie to you. I'm kind of dreading this talk just a little bit, even though I'm excited about having it. I was dreading it a little bit.
yeah, and I can't blame you. I mean, it's like I said, it's been literally beaten to death. There's nothing more of the old stuff that we can talk about that's new at this
Hmm.
point. And if we're just going to rehash the stuff that you and I have talked about over the last 2 years, there's not much of a point in that, right?
Right.
Okay. So, just to give everyone kind of a history on this, Josh and I have both pretty consistently fallen on opposite sides of this movie. Josh started, first viewing, and I think we mentioned this last week. First viewing was kind of off-putting for him, and then
Yeah,
after,
yeah.
yeah, then after multiple viewings, he and you can talk about it a little bit, but he really grew to appreciate that movie a lot more.
Yeah,
Is that
let
fair?
me talk about that just a little
Sure.
bit, if that's okay.
Yeah, go
That's
for it.
very fair.
Okay.
I think, going into The Last Jedi, I think I had a lot of expectations of things happening a certain way. Like, I wanted to see very specifically, like, Luke and Rey take on the Knights of Ren on Octo or something like that.
Yeah.
And there were some other things I was expecting, and things that I definitely didn't expect, like Snoke meeting his quick end.
Yeah.
Things that kind of just threw me for a loop when I saw it the first time, and it it was very, there were parts of that movie that were very jarring for me that really pulled me out of it the first time I saw it. And honestly, I was very disappointed walking out of the theater the first time, and I didn't know if I liked it or not. Um, I didn't know how to feel about it. I had all these conflicting emotions going on. It really
Right.
challenged me quite a lot, and I, for an instant, for a short amount of time, felt like this movie just ruined Star Wars. um, so because I had that initial reaction, I can definitely understand other people not liking this film.
Okay.
But as Adam said, upon multiple viewings and then kind of putting my expectations aside, I came to appreciate what this movie is. So.
Okay, great. So then, me on the other hand, I watched it the first time, and like Josh said, there were just a lot of things that for me I couldn't swallow. I couldn't accept
Hmm.
a lot of things, and we'll get into some of those later. Um, but I really just couldn't appreciate it for what it was because of some of those things. Uh, and for that reason, for the longest time, I did not give it a second chance. And even when I did, Josh and I watched it again about a year ago, maybe less.
Yeah, which I greatly appreciated, by the way, that you were
Yeah,
willing to give it another chance.
right. So even after that second viewing, I couldn't get past some of those things that initially I just didn't like. I just couldn't move past it. Um, and and I think one of the points that right now that I would like to make is that not ev- in every fandom, not just Star Wars, in every fandom, it's going to be something that's not for everybody. Okay,
Hmm.
that doesn't mean that you have to stop being a fan at that point. That doesn't mean that you are not a fan of that particular topic anymore. It just means that that particular thing wasn't for you, and that's okay. And I think that
Yeah,
that's
I think
something that
some of the
everyone,
reactions were very extreme.
yeah, very, that's very true.
Hmm.
Um, so to kind of move past all that, the last couple weeks I decided to rewatch the entire saga from episode one, include everything Solo, Rogue One, all the way up to episode 8. And I finished that rewatch this week, like I said before, and I actually rewatched episode 8 twice this week.
Hmm.
Um, my One of the reasons why I wanted to start watching the saga all over again, and there were a couple reasons. You know, one obviously I just wanted to kind of get in that mood again. With
Yeah,
Rise of
absolutely.
Skywalker coming up, I just kind of wanted to dust it off, refresh my memory, um, just kind of get back into that Star Wars mode.
Hmm.
But the other thing was, I started thinking about my feelings on Last Jedi over the last couple weeks. And I don't want this to sound disparaging because it's not meant to be at all.
Sure.
But I was, one of my main thoughts was that if I can watch the prequels and enjoy them, because I do enjoy the prequels, I hate that mentality that 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 people pretend that they don't exist because
Oh yeah,
they're
yeah,
very
I agree.
important. They are very
I mean,
important. They have
yeah, I
glaring,
certainly have issues
yeah, they have
with the
glaring
prequels, and
issues. They
but
have
but I love
problems.
them at the same time.
Yep.
So.
They have undeniable problems. You can't get past that. There's
Hmm.
definite issues. But I enjoy watching them every time I do. Uh,
Right.
and my mentality on this viewing of the saga is that if I can have that approach, I should be able to have that approach to The Last Jedi, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so I rewatched it again. And I found that that in that light, and like I said, I don't mean that to be. I know that sounds like if I can watch this crappy thing, then I can also watch this crappy thing. But that's not how I mean that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know that's not what you mean.
Okay. So yeah. So I rewatched it with that point of view, and I came away feeling a lot better about the Last Jedi. There's also a couple things that I did some research on, did some learning on, and
Hmm.
it helped me a lot because I'll tell you, my main sticking point, The Last Jedi, has always been the treatment of Luke. Okay,
Sure, sure.
I and even with this, I will say that I prefer the original trilogy and even Legends interpretation of his character.
That's fair enough. Yeah, that's fair.
But I can more understand after some research. I can more understand Luke in The Last Jedi. One of the main things that I was upset about is I don't like the fact that Luke and part of this. So before I say this, part of this I
Hmm.
think is is a shortcoming in storytelling, not just in The Last Jedi, but also in Force Awakens as well. We know that this takes place 30 years after Return of the Jedi,
Hmm.
but in between that time, we still just don't have a lot of details about what's happened in between. Okay,
Yeah, I'm hoping that we get something that fills in some of those gaps.
I'm sure we will after Episode 9 is said and
Hmm.
done. I'm sure we're gonna get other stories in between that. At this point, we just really don't. So it's kind of tough to put some of these things in perspective sometimes. And one of the things that I had a problem with is the idea that Luke has been gone for because it feels like a long time, right?
Yeah,
Even though after doing some reading, it's really not that long. It's only
probably like 5 years or so.
5 to 6 years.
5 to 6 years. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and yeah, that's something that I actually thought about just last night when I was watching The Last Jedi as well. That
right.
it feels like he's been gone for so long, but really it's been a relatively short amount of time. And I think just to what you were saying about the setup of Luke, we have to look back to the Force Awakens, and even further back than that, we have to look to George Lucas's original treatment for the sequel trilogy. It was very much his intention to have Luke on an island, or like
Right,
on this planet by himself.
right.
Um, and that came from George himself, which I think maybe people don't recognize.
Yeah,
But then it was also JJ's conscious decision to have him have vanished, and the kind of whole plot behind the Force Awakens is finding Luke Skywalker. Um, and he doesn't come back to save Han. He doesn't, do any of those things. So obviously, he's disconnected from the Force. And so Ryan had to take that and give a reason that Luke would be on this island, cut off from the Force, and
right,
I guess make it what he could, given what the setup was.
right. And like I said, I still don't like that so much, but I
Right.
understand it. Okay, and I can understand it even more because it's only a 5 to 6 year period. Like you said, it feels like a lot longer. Uh, because it feels like
Yeah, it
Luke's been.
does.
It feels like he's been so out of touch for so long that personally I can't. I wasn't able to at the time swallow the fact that it felt like he was gone that long without wanting to help. But
Sure. Sure.
when you put that in perspective and you realize, okay, so it's not really that long. It's only this 5 to 6 year period.
Hmm.
I can deal with that a little bit better.
Yeah, it's a
For
little bit easier
me,
to swallow.
yeah, for me, Luke has been the hero of Star Wars for so long, right? And I
Yeah.
hated the idea that he was going to be made into something else. But there's also, once you think about it in that perspective, there's also 24 to 25 years of possible future storytelling where he can be that hero.
Absolutely.
So I can deal with that at that point. Like I said, I still don't prefer it, but I can deal with it at that point.
Right. And I think, for me, and I think for you, assuming that Luke maybe is your favorite Star Wars character.
Obi-Wan, but okay.
Okay, but he's up there, right?
Yeah, for sure.
He's up there.
Yeah.
Now Luke is my favorite.
Okay.
He
Yeah.
he is my favorite character, and always has been in Star Wars. And for me, even though that's true, I still got a lot out of Luke's character in The Last Jedi, and I didn't mind his treatment for the most part.
Okay.
And I guess that's just a different point of view, which is what this
Yep.
is all about.
Yep.
Um, because I think what happens in this film, and in this, maybe even in this sequel trilogy, is that our heroes and our legends become humanized in a way, which either you like that or you don't. It's one of those things where you either like that they become more human, like capable, having flaws, capable of failure. And I think that The Last Jedi is a lot about failure and what we can learn from failure. And I love that, because in my own life I have failed myself, and I have done things that would be akin to turning to the dark side. And so I think I can really relate to that story of experiencing failure and learning from it. And I think that's why it connected with me so much. But some people might want their legend to stay a legend, and
Yeah.
not,
Right. And
kind
yeah.
of go
Yeah.
through that type of thing.
Yeah.
But I would say, for me, leading up to The Last Jedi, watching the trailers and everything, I kind of knew going in, okay, this isn't going to be easy. Luke isn't just going to come back and train Rey, and he, based on what I'm seeing. So I kind of expected that it would be very hard to get Luke to come on board because of what happened and his failure. But then by the end, he would. Was kind of my feeling on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. So yeah.
So I think that's why for me it's easier to kind of accept
Yeah. Definitely.
Luke's character in this movie.
Right. And like I said, for me, it kind of took learning, reading, and understanding that this is a pretty small portion of the timeline in the scheme of things. So
Right.
so it made that for me a lot easier to swallow, I guess.
And I don't know if you've
I'm
checked this
very
out or not, Adam.
yeah. Go for it.
On the Last Jedi Blu-ray or whatever, the special features, there's a special feature called The Director and the Jedi.
I think we
And
watched that together.
yeah, and it's all about kind of, Ryan, kind of, a lot of it is Ryan and dealing with Luke's character, and Mark Hamill kind of coming to terms with that, because he was obviously opposed to where Luke's character went, and he's been vocal about that. But I think that too kind of gave me some insight into, the character choices.
Sure.
So it's definitely worth a look.
Yeah. Yeah. So moving past Luke here,
Hmm.
there are still some things that I have a hard time with.
Sure.
Uh, but and here's the point that I want to make. I don't want to just rehash everything I don't like, because, like I said, we've done this before. I don't want to again.
Right. Right.
Obviously, one of the major things, and we've talked about this, is the whole Canto Bite thing. I don't like Canto Bite. Not the fact that it
Yeah.
exists. I just don't like that whole
Right.
segment. I don't like Finn and Rose's uh, mission, or I don't think it helps. I don't like that whole thing. I don't like DJ as a character. Very odd. I don't like the whole arms stealing subplot thing.
It is definitely the weakest
In my
part
opinion,
of
it
this
definitely
movie.
is. But here's
Yeah.
and here's the point that I want to make.
Hmm.
If I can watch like a half an hour of pod racing, I can deal with half an hour of Canto Bite, right?
Yeah, I mean,
I
I think
don't
the point
like
you're
that it's
making
there.
is
I don't like
right.
that it's there.
And even
But
though I like The Last Jedi, I, also don't like, I don't like that part. I mean, even last night I was watching it and I literally fast forwarded through all the Canto Bite stuff, and
yeah,
I am not a fan of the DJ character. I'm not a fan of the Canto Bite subplot and any of that. Um, and I think the point you're trying to make is that in every Star Wars film, there are things that to pick out of it that you don't really like.
yeah. Even
Even
even A New Hope. I mean,
right.
there are some really awkward dialogue moments in A New Hope that
Sure.
just make me cringe sometimes.
Yeah, and for me, even Return of the Jedi, like the stuff in Jabba's palace that happens, like the musical number, all that stuff, like it's kind of cringeworthy to me. And
Yeah,
there's certain things that I don't like about that, but at the same time, Return of the Jedi is my second favorite Star Wars movie, and I love the latter part of that whole beginning of the movie where the Luke's lightsaber gets shot into the air from R2 and he catches it, and Return of the Jedi music comes on, and
Hmm.
it's awesome. But I think there are always going to be those moments in any Star Wars movie that are like, I could do without that,
Yeah,
and that's okay.
sure. Yeah, definitely. And then I think we have to touch on Leia, uh, and specifically her Leia Poppins scene. Mm.
Yeah, Leia Poppins. I have that on in my notes right here. It
Okay,
says Leia
great,
Poppins.
great, cool. It actually says that in my notes too. Um,
Yeah.
my main sticking point on her the whole time was her, it was her lack of a Jedi training for that whole thing,
Hmm.
and because in the new canon, we definitely know that she has not completed her Jedi training. She's kind of set that aside to do politics,
Yep.
senatorial,
Hmm.
and then later general stuff. So we know that she really hasn't had a lot of training, right?
Right.
I think I think part of my problem is with that whole scene. First of all, and this is kind of another problem I have with it, is the cinematography of it all. I think that was just
Yeah.
a really weird way to film that scene.
Yeah,
Uh,
it definitely looks weird, and I can't tell if it's happening in real time or if it's kind of
that's
slow
right,
motion.
right. It's really weird, and I think that's part of the problem too. Is I just don't think it was explained very well on screen.
Right.
So the explanation for that, and I've known this all along, was that this was I guess a few days after first viewing.
Hmm.
Was that she used a force pull for that to pull herself closer to the ship. Okay.
Yes, correct.
And I don't even want to talk about any of the stuff around like if she's actually frozen at that point, because this is a science fiction movie, so I don't want to like our rules around what happens in space kind of don't really apply here, okay?
Right. It's not
Because
the
then we have
same
to
exact rules.
ignore all kinds of other stuff, and we just can't go down that road.
Right. I
I
agree.
just don't think that it was explained very well on screen in order to make that a more believable scene, I guess. I know I'm really stumbling over that, but it's like,
No, I definitely can hear what you're saying, and I
right.
agree.
Okay. So,
Um,
as far as, yeah, and I don't know if, do you have anything else to add to Leia Poppins?
yeah, I do actually.
Okay, go for it.
Just from my point of view, I can completely see why that took some people out of the movie. For the first time for me too, it was a little bit jarring, um, and everything. But I think one thing from my point of view is that some Star Wars fans, I think, get caught up in the whole training thing. And I think, like, looking at, oh, Luke trained for this many scenes and this many hours, so he can do this and that and everything.
Right,
I think it's a little more. I think there's a little more to it than that. I don't think somebody necessarily, in my opinion, has to have training to be able to access the Force. And I
right.
think in that
And
moment, and kind of a survival instinct kind of kicked in, and we know that her family's strong with the Force, so I think she was able to kind of access it in that moment without necessarily being trained. But we
yeah,
also
so
might get a
for
little
me,
bit.
yeah, so for me, it's kind of a little different because, like you said, I do buy into the training part of it, and I think
Right,
for me to get past all that, to wrap my head around all that, you have to understand that that doesn't mean that she's had zero training.
right.
It just means that she hasn't gone very deep into her training.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so
and
so
yeah,
for her to do a force projection and to appear halfway across the galaxy, I couldn't believe that.
that
And
would be completely unbelievable.
so for me, we go back to Todd Fisher's comments about her being a Jedi Knight or whatever in Episode 9. For me,
Right.
I wouldn't buy that. I wouldn't like that.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
for
I mean, I think
but
it's
we're also
possible that we might
talking
get.
Yeah, but we're also talking about a pretty basic ability here in a force pull. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
so I guess when you think about it in that perspective, it's a little easier to get around. We know that she has had some training, and at that point,
Mhm.
I could see a force pull being being fine
Yeah.
for that whole scenario.
And I think it's possible in episode 9 that we might even get a little information possibly about that Luke trained Leia at some point, and maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it could be.
But
And I think he
I
did.
also
We
yeah,
know that in Bloodlines that she has had some training, and I'm sure that had to come from Luke.
right,
So
right, for
we
sure.
know that has happened. We just don't know how much it's happened. And even if it happened at a very basic level, you would think that a force pull is something that would be practiced. So
Yes. Now, so of course, I think we've always wanted to see Leia use the Force in some way, just
mhm.
because of what Luke tells her in Return of the Jedi, that the Force is strong in his family. He has it. His father has it. His sister has it. Um, but maybe the execution of it wasn't the best, and I can appreciate
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
for sure. And even though in kind of hindsight, with Carrie passing and with the John Williams music playing, and just kind of I think it can be this beautiful moment for the character, but I also can see that the execution maybe wasn't the best and could pull some people out of it. So I can definitely
right.
see another point of view on that.
So we've talked a good bit here about stuff that I personally have had a problem with that I didn't like, but I don't want
Sure.
to stop there. There's actually some things that I really do like about The Last Jedi. I think the Kylo Ren's story arc is very interesting. I think that his dynamic with Rey is also very interesting. I think his pull to the light and his falling out of favor with Snoke all are very well done. I like
Yeah.
every aspect of everything that happened there. I like the opening battle scene. I think that's very Revenge of the Sith esque in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I absolutely love it. I
Yeah,
do.
yeah, it's very good.
I
Some of the
think
stuff, and I don't want to get into this. Like some of the stuff, like I don't like Poe's little humor thing. I think that just feels out of place. I understand why it
yeah, I do.
happens, but
Right, and it's kind of
overall,
a callback to
yeah,
his kinda how he talks to Kylo Ren in The
sure,
Force
right,
Awakens, but
right.
I agree that it goes maybe a little too far with
It's a little too
a
far
joke
with
about
your
his
mom.
mother and
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah, like,
but
that didn't feel very Star Wars to me.
yeah, but overall, I think that it's a great opening battle scene. Um,
Yeah, I would actually argue that, um, in my opinion, the ending of The Force Awakens and the beginning of The Last Jedi, the opening scene of The Last Jedi, are two of my very favorite endings and beginnings of a Star Wars movie,
okay,
for me.
okay,
Um, and I love how The Force Awakens ends with the Jedi steps and the finale, and that music, and and
hmm
and just kind of Rey extending the saber to Luke in a literal cliffhanger, and then just that opening space battle. So
yeah,
that was definitely, I made a list of kind of negatives and positives about The
yeah,
Last Jedi, and
yeah. I did
and
too.
the opening battle was definitely a positive for me.
Yeah, and I have, like I said, I've watched this a couple times this week. I really love Yoda's dialogue and the way that he moves the story ahead. Uh,
Yeah, definitely that lesson that Luke
the
still needs,
lesson,
even.
right,
Yeah,
right, yeah. I really love Yoda's role in that
absolutely.
story. I think that's very well done.
Hmm.
Uh, I I like the use of the puppet again. It, it,
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
yeah, it's maybe when you get used to a CGI Yoda, it's maybe a little bit off-putting when you first see it.
Yeah,
But I do like the use of the puppet. I like the fact that the Yoda's the one, the one that does the burning. I think that it's kind of fitting for his character that he would do that. Um,
yeah, and I think it kind of
which
expands
is odd,
on.
right? Yeah, because you would expect Yoda as one of the oldest Jedi masters, being Yoda himself, that would be something he wouldn't do. Um,
Right, and I'm wondering if he did that with the knowledge that Ray had
I'm
the
sure he
books.
had to. Like, I'm
You know,
sure he had to because he doesn't actually say it's time for the Jedi to end. He says,
no,
right,
it's right.
because that's what Luke says. So it's time for the Jedi to end, and Yoda says, "Well, it's really it's time for you to look past this, right?"
Yeah, it's time for you to look past this and do kind of what I told you to do, which is
Right.
once again pass on what you've learned.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
um, and I think it also really expands upon what you're able to do with the Force when you have become one with the Force, like being able to interact with kind of with the physical environment in a way with
Yeah.
um,
That
causing
was
it.
right. Right. Yeah. That was
So
kind of
this
a
movie
new.
definitely expands on the power of the Force, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had an issue with that at first. I think that now that I've
Mm,
come to terms with some of these things, like what Leia was able to do, and kind of what we're seeing, that I've calmed down on that. I guess
yeah,
I've kind of backed off on some of those things. And like I said, I just want to like this doesn't mean that it's my favorite movie. It doesn't
oh no,
mean that I
right.
love every aspect of it.
Hmm.
But I just wanted to touch on this whole thing because I think that it's easy to get caught up in some of the minor details, like how Leia looks or um,
Yeah.
how short of a time period we're actually talking about with Luke. Uh,
Hmm.
I think it's kind of easy to get caught up in those details and to miss some things that are really important and that are actually done well. The main reason I wanted to talk about all this isn't to rehash all this stuff. It's to focus on the fact that you don't have to love everything about a movie. You don't even like to like the movie as a whole. uh,
Right.
in order to still be a fan, to still love Star Wars, to still want to get into this stuff. It doesn't have to stop you from any of that. And that's kind of the point that
Yeah.
I really wanted to make with this whole discussion.
I couldn't agree more. And I think sometimes again reactions and even and thinking about The Last Jedi, thinking about season 8 of Game of Thrones,
Hmm.
I think people become very um they kind of claim kind of an ownership over these stories because it's so much a part of their it's more than a movie, it's more than a
Yeah,
TV show, it
right.
becomes part of you. And so when you feel so connected to it and you feel like it goes in a way that goes against what you thought, I think we can have a very extreme and very negative reaction to the point where we almost want to just be like, okay, I'm done. Um,
Right.
but I think it's really important to sometimes put your own expectations aside and take it in again and again and see, is there something I can pull from this that I like, and this is still part of the story. This is part of the canon, and there's going to be more. Even though maybe I didn't like this, I mean, maybe I like this, and there's going to be
Hmm.
more stories.
Right.
There's going to be more movies. So I think that's an excellent way to approach it.
Cool.
But
So
yeah,
at this point, do you have any other last points to make on The Last Jedi?
I do. I mean,
Okay, go for it.
even I just think as a whole, yeah, The Last Jedi isn't my favorite Star Wars movie. There are things about it that I don't like, and then I can definitely understand the other side of people not liking it. But at the same time, there's a lot there I think that is complex. I think it's a deep emotional story. I think there's a lot to love about it. Um, I think one thing it does is it's a good middle act where it challenges the characters and talks about failure. And then we haven't seen the third part of this three-part act yet. um and like how it's all gonna, and I think a lot of things that happen could pay off in episode 9. And I love how Ryan Johnson pulled out the best performances that these actors could give. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, that's fair.
I think that he did a very good job of pulling some excellent performances out of Mark Hamill, out of Carrie Fisher, out of Adam Driver, to really just add so much to those characters. And for me, it's one of the more kind of emotional and complex Star Wars movies that's out there for me. And so I think that's what I really take away from it as this middle act, and I'm excited about where it goes from here. So that's
Cool,
pretty much all I have on it.
cool, great. All right, so that kind of wraps up our points of view topic. Let's wrap up this episode as a whole.
I'm just glad you're here. At the end.
Well, I just want to say once again, I'm just very glad to be able to have this conversation with you. It, to be honest with you, it's been kind of a tough 2 years for me in Star Wars, being on the
Sure.
other side of, and not feeling like I had too many people to talk to about Star Wars just because of the Last Jedi stuff. But I'm so glad that it was so refreshing to be able to have this conversation with you and kind of
Yeah.
bring our 2 points of view together. And I think that's what we need to do as a whole Star Wars fandom. And I just loved the conversation today.
Cool. Great. Just remember, everyone, I know it took a little bit this week to get the show live everywhere, but we are now live on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. You can also visit the website, certainpointofview.com. There you'll find the blogs and links to all the shows. You'll also find links to our Facebook page and our Twitter account that we launched this week as well. So make sure you're connecting with us everywhere. We're excited to talk to all of you. This is a great week for us. Like I said, we launched everything this week. Facebook page jumped from 0 likes to 50 likes in a week, which was just amazing to watch. The Twitter account is up to 10 or 11 follows, and we had a good 10 to 15 listens on the podcast this week. It's just really exciting stuff to see after just 1 week. Thank you.
Absolutely, and we appreciate your support.
Yeah, thank you to everybody. Really excited. We can't wait to do this even more going forward. So with that, I guess we'll wrap up episode 2.
Yeah, I just think it's an exciting time to be a Star Wars fan, and it's a good time to be doing this. So do we want to close? I know you said you'd be Leia for me.
Let's do it.
One time, but are you going to continue that?
Go for it.
The Force will be with you.
Always.